The following video is one in a series on spiritual resilience training, a non-religious view of personal values and their dynamics with others. The contents reflect a variety of principles and practices of systems theory in relational counseling for team building and family resilience. Although the series is intended to support Army Corps values, each video also encourages the viewer to reflect on their current prominent values in specific situations and to consider what values may be more appropriate to means and results that are honorable and helpful with others. Chaplain Dillard initiates creating and posting these videos. Their contents and YouTube's linked videos do not necessarily reflect specific beliefs, practices, requirements, or endorsements of the Department of Defense, its subordinate organizations, or other groups with which Chaplain Dillard is affiliated.
Welcome back. We're continuing our series in 5 love languages. Last week was an introduction. If you haven't seen that, I encourage you to watch it. It covers some basic principles that I won't go back into here in any detail. We're going to cover these not necessarily in any order of importance, just in alphabetical order. And so we're going to start with acts of service. Maybe you've heard that actions speak louder than words, but sometimes when we hear a phrase so often, it tends to lose its meaning. How about this? Your actions are speaking so loudly, I can't hear a word that you're saying. Think about that. Your actions are speaking so loudly, I can't hear a word that you're saying. In our relationships with our family members, our co-workers, etc., we may say to them that they're important to us, that we are committed to them, that we know them, that we trust them, that we want to work on things together. But if our actions, particularly our actions of service, meeting their needs in particular ways, if that is not consistent with what we're saying, they might not articulate it that way, but pretty much that's what they're saying. It's important to note as well that human development necessarily involves service. Think about infants, toddlers, school-age kids launching young adults, and maybe them returning sometime. Boomerang kids. All those stages of life and beyond necessarily involve acts of service. Teaching babies how to be safe, teaching toddlers how to walk, helping them to feed themselves, showing them acts of service and care and nurture, providing discipline as is necessary and appropriate to the age in order to encourage them in good behavior, introducing them to other relationships of healthy friendships in school, showing them how to discern between somebody who will treat them with respect as an older child and somebody who will just want to use them. All those are acts of service, things that we do with them to be helpful to them. So service is inherently a part of life. However, adults who lacked healthy service when they were growing up may react on a spectrum of work ethic, especially. Now, when I say work ethic, I'm not just talking about work in the office or in their vocation, but in terms of acting to serve someone else. They can be on a broad spectrum of being very passive-aggressive, doing nothing to get their way, to being a workaholic, doing for others all the time in order to earn respect and affection and loyalty, etc. Because if they didn't get that coming up, they could be way over here and say, I didn't get it from anybody else, I see no reason to give it to you, and I'm not going to be cooperative. And it could be out of a fear that if they do act to serve someone, whether that be their boss or coworkers or their spouse or kids, that it won't make a difference because they didn't see the difference or any difference in their family. Or it could be the other extreme, that they do so much all the time because they think that their acts of service is the totality of their worth. They're only appreciated and loved and receive commitment from others if they do all the time. If you know that you highly value service and others with whom you have a relationship might not, you need to beware of ritual. What I mean by that is this. Sometimes we can get into rote thinking and rote behavior where we do the same acts of service our whole life long. If I'm a became a workaholic when I was a teenager, and I lived that through my time dating my wife and with my wife and into my vocation. That can become my ritual, and I do it without thinking about how is the other person receiving that? How are they perceiving that? What is that doing for or to our relationship? What we learned in our culture, whether that's our family culture, racial culture, religious, etc., may not necessarily be the culture of the other person. I grew up in a work family. We owned our own business. My wife grew up in a coach's family, so a work ethic was important to both of us, and both of us served other people in different senses of the word. Her dad coached golf and basketball and some football and other things, and we waited on customers at a fishing resort. So we both had strong work ethics, but we didn't always ask, what is that doing for our relationship or to our relationship with our kids? Do our kids see that we love them even when they're not compulsive workaholics, and that we shouldn't necessarily be workaholics because that takes time away from other relationships, and we come home at the end of the day emotionally and physically exhausted. So just because it was part of our culture doesn't necessarily mean it's part of their culture and that relationship is going to go well. We have to consider both people in the relationship. Secondly, what we've done in the past is not necessarily what would be most helpful now. Now that's a different point than culture, because maybe I have considered culture. Maybe I considered, okay, my wife grew up with two sisters, and I grew up with two brothers, and so I've stopped expecting her to act like a man, and she's stopped expecting me to act more feminine. And so we've made some of those adjustments, and we've gotten into certain behaviors with each other that in the past have worked. But maybe now we're at a different stage in our relationship because most of our kids are now launched out of the home. Or maybe in my job, things that worked in my last unit were effective, but now I'm in a different unit and it may not be as effective here. So just because it worked well for me last year or 5 years or 10 years ago doesn't mean that it will work now and in the future. We have to reevaluate our relationships in the context of what's going on now and is to come. So we need to learn how specific individuals in our lives provide acts of service for others. For example, discern between how they are truly serving others to encourage them versus possible acts of quid pro quo, meaning this for that. If you want to know how important it is for someone else to give and receive acts of service, watch how they do that with other people. And they may be genuinely giving, genuinely service-oriented, or they may be doing it in order to get something, and it's more of a manipulation or a fear-based act. But watch them. If you can especially see them in different contexts with different people and you begin to discern patterns, you can learn how important or not important acts of service is to them. This can be important with your spouse, it can be important with your kids, with your coworkers and friends, because you really want to understand the heart of the person, what is meaningful to them, so that you can have an appropriate relationship with them. Secondly, try to assess how much they value acts of service, maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, and then ask. You might say to a coworker, it seems to me that doing for others is very important to you. Maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe a 7 or an 8. Is that right? Now, if you're going to ask, phrase it positively. Maybe choose a different gift and say that a different act of service. Giving is important to you, or touch seems to be important to you. I notice that you're always touching me on the shoulder and you shake hands for a long time. We'll cover some of those later. But after you've kind of mentally assessed it yourself and said something to them, then ask, is that about right or is it different with you? And they can say. Thirdly, ask for a discussion of what acts of service would be most helpful between you in your specific context. Because what works for you at work may not work for you at home. What works with one of your kids may not work with another one of your kids. So have that talk. It may be hurtful to you to find out that you want to do a lot of things with or for them, but they're at a point in their life where they want to do less things with you. My daughter right now is 16, and sometimes she wants to be with me a lot and talking and sitting beside me and doing things. Sometimes she wants her space and doesn't want me to be around her doing anything with her or talking with her at all. That's the place she is right now. And if I'm going to have a good relationship with her, I've got to understand that and respect that. Lastly, seek balance by giving and receiving acts of service in your personal life. When we are talking about love languages, we're really talking about heart issues. Feeling loved, giving love, experiencing love, expressing love, and understandably, we have other relationships too. We have work relationships and we have social relationships that are less intimate. If we don't give and receive what we need in our personal relationships, it can improperly overflow into work and less social relationships, and that can be very inappropriate. So we need to make sure that we are seeking those things in people or with people that we have more intimate relationships with and work that out there. Otherwise, we're going to go to work and social situations emotionally hungry, and that could not be helpful. Hope this video has been helpful, however. Tune in next time and we'll look at the next love language, and I hope to see you then.
At the release date of this video, I am stationed with Research Development and Engineering Command, RDECOM, at Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. Because the majority of our personnel are in this area, I spend most of my time here. I do, however, travel to our distant units based on command priorities and budget. I place these videos on YouTube for broad visibility to Army personnel and their families, but I hope the videos will be helpful to others too. If you are assigned to RDECOM and want to request specific topics by video, training on site or by VTC, or confidential counseling on site or by secure webcam, you can contact me at jeffrey.d.dillard.mil@mail.mil.